It's just after midnight on February 4th, 2016. The Bangladesh Bank building in Dhaka is dim and nearly empty. A lone clerk scrolls through a list of outgoing messages, clicking quietly, thinking it's another routine night. Only the hum of computers fills the air. Far away on the other side of the world, in a small room, a man stares at his screen. His fingers hover over the keyboard. One wrong move, and everything fails. One tiny mistake, and he could be caught. He takes a deep breath, and then he presses enter. Back in Bangladesh, millions of dollars start to move, disappearing from the Bangladesh bank, going somewhere no one will notice. But none of this started tonight. It began months earlier with a simple job application email, and once it was opened, there was no going back. Months earlier, in early 2015, the Bangladesh Bank's headquarters in Dhaka buzzed like any other government office. Slow, procedural, predictable. On the fourth floor, the IT division sat behind glass partitions filled with humming servers and aging desktops. Outdated antivirus software blinked quietly in the corner. Nothing seemed unusual. Then an email arrived. Subject line: job application, resume attached. It looked harmless. No threats, no warnings, no reason to suspect anything at all. The sender's address appeared professional, the attachment neatly labelled CV.pdf. A clerk opened it, and in that single moment, a silent breach began. Hidden inside the file was a small piece of code designed not to destroy, but to watch, to listen, to wait. Over the next few days, the malware spread through the internal network like mist. It recorded passwords, captured keystrokes, and mapped out the bank's most sensitive system, its SWIFT terminal. SWIFT is the global messaging network used by central banks to move billions every day. By the end of the week, the attackers could see what the clerks saw. They could log in when no one was looking. From somewhere far outside Bangladesh, some say Eastern Europe, others point to Pyongyang, commands were tested. They drafted fake messages and studied security limits of Bangladeshi bank. For months, they remained invisible. They learned that the SWIFT terminal wasn't directly connected to the internet, so they used infected local machines to bridge the gap. They discovered the bank's weekend fell on Friday and Saturday, giving them a precious window when no one would be watching. They built patience into their plan. Every login, every movement, every file copied had a purpose. They stole printer logs to hide future transactions, changed timestamps, and masked their tracks within layers of legitimate traffic. By January 2016, the intruders weren't just observing anymore, they were ready to act. And inside the Bangladesh bank, no one had any idea. The antivirus license had expired months ago. The firewalls were outdated. The network that guarded an entire nation's reserves had become an open door. In late January, one of the hackers tested a single SWIFT message, just a few $1,000s, then watched it pass through undetected. It worked. From that moment on, the plan was set. In a few short days, they would attempt something no one had ever done before: steal tens of millions directly from a country's central bank using nothing more than a keyboard. It's the evening of Thursday, February 4th, 2016. Across Dhaka, the city is winding down for the weekend. Inside the Bangladesh bank, most employees have gone home. Only a handful of staff remain on the night shift, overseeing routine operations. Nothing unusual, but for the group watching from afar, this is the moment they've been waiting for. For months, they'd studied everything: the bank's security schedule, its login patterns, even when printers were most active. They knew the Federal Reserve Bank of New York would still be open when Bangladesh shut down for Friday prayers. They knew this timing created the perfect blind spot, a gap of nearly 2 days before anyone in Dhaka would notice. At precisely 8:36 p.m., the first fake transfer request was sent through the SWIFT system. Then another, and another. Each message carried an official seal, a legitimate account number, and the proper digital signature, indistinguishable from the real thing. The destination, a handful of private accounts at the Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, or RCBC in the Philippines. The amounts varied: $6 million, $20 million, $30 million, carefully split to avoid detection. Each request instructed the New York Fed to move Bangladesh's money into those accounts. citing vague purposes like payment for imports or infrastructure investment. Back in Dhaka, the system processed the commands without question. Everything appeared normal. Within hours, 35 transfer requests had been issued, totaling nearly $951 million. That night, hundreds of millions of dollars began moving through the Federal Reserve systems, silently, efficiently, just like any other transaction, but not all of them made it through. In New York, a few analysts at the Fed's payments division noticed something strange. One request mentioned a private entity called the Shalika Foundation. That single misspelling, foundation instead of foundation, triggered suspicion. A small typo, a human error, and it changed everything. The Fed flagged the transaction, halting the queue for further verification. By morning, they had blocked 30 of the 35 transfer requests, but 5 had already slipped through. By the time anyone in Bangladesh woke up, $101 million was gone. $20 million had been sent to Sri Lanka, to a local NGO called the Shalika Foundation, but that transfer was frozen almost immediately thanks to the typo. The rest, $81 million, had already arrived in the Philippines. There, the money was quickly split into 4 personal accounts opened under fake names. Over the next 48 hours, it began to vanish again, withdrawn in cash, converted into casino chips, and laundered through a maze of gambling rooms and junket operators. By the time Bangladesh's weekend ended and officials returned to work, the crime was already done. Their reserve funds, money that represented salaries, projects, and debt payments, had been siphoned out of the country without a single alarm going off. On Monday morning, as clerks sat down at their desks, something odd happened. The printer connected to the SWIFT terminal, the one that usually printed transaction logs, had stopped working. When they tried to restart it, the queue suddenly filled with dozens of unprinted requests, lines of text they'd never seen before. And with every page, the truth came into focus. They hadn't just been hacked, they'd been robbed. Not by gunmen or thieves, but by code. Lines of invisible instructions that had slipped past every defense they had. Monday, February 8, 2016. The Bangladesh bank headquarters is unusually tense. Clerks huddle around printers, reading page after page of SWIFT confirmations. Most don't understand what they're looking at until they see the numbers. Tens of millions of dollars. Gone. Sent to accounts they've never heard of. Within hours, the panic spreads. Supervisors are called in. Meetings begin. Phones ring non-stop. No one can quite believe what they're seeing. The SWIFT network, the system designed to be impenetrable, had executed dozens of transactions without authorization. When the governor of the Bangladesh bank is notified, he assumes it must be a clerical error, a system glitch, maybe a test that went wrong. After all, this isn't a commercial bank, it's a central bank. Their funds move through the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, one of the most secure financial institutions on the planet. Surely the money is still there, but it isn't. As the hours pass, the truth hardens. The transfers were real, the funds had already cleared, and the Federal Reserve had simply followed authenticated instructions from the Bangladesh bank's own account. The impossible had happened. Emails fly back and forth between Dhaka and New York. Each side tries to make sense of it. The Bangladesh team insists they never approved those transactions. The Fed responds, "Your SWIFT credentials were valid. The messages came from your network. Your digital signature checked out." Somewhere between those two institutions, trust begins to fracture. For the next few days, confusion reigns. Officials try to trace the funds, but cross-border banking doesn't move in straight lines. Each transfer bounces through intermediaries, correspondent accounts, and holding banks. The first real lead comes from Sri Lanka. Investigators there freeze a $20 million transfer meant for an NGO called the Shalika Foundation. The payment references infrastructure funding in, but the NGO has never heard of it. It's the only reason that money survived. All because of one spelling mistake, foundation. But the rest, the remaining $81 million Haritwo, has already entered the Philippine banking system. And there, the trail begins to blur. Unlike most countries, casinos in the Philippines aren't covered under anti-money laundering laws. They don't have to report suspicious transactions. So, while the world's banking network scrambled to freeze accounts, the stolen money was already being converted into casino chips, withdrawn in cash, gambled, layered, and washed through junket rooms in Manila. By the time Bangladesh's investigators arrived, it was too late. Every hour, the trail grew colder. Inside Bangladesh Bank, frustration turned to disbelief. They had been robbed of $81 million, right under the supervision of the Federal Reserve, and no one could explain how. The media caught wind of it within days. Headlines spread across Asia. Bangladesh Bank loses millions in cyber heist. But inside the bank, the mood wasn't outrage. It was humiliation. No one wanted to admit what had really happened, that the theft had started with a single email, that their central banking system had been infiltrated for months without a trace, and that the people behind it weren't ordinary hackers. They were professionals, organized, patient, possibly backed by a state, a digital heist on a scale the world had never seen before. By late February, investigators from Bangladesh, the Philippines, and the United States are all chasing the same ghost. The money trail cuts through 5 different banks, 3 jurisdictions, and a maze of shell accounts that vanish as quickly as they appear. In Manila, a junior analyst at the Anti-Money Laundering Council spends her nights combing through transaction logs. She traces the flow from one local bank, Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, or RCBC, to dozens of newly opened accounts, all under false names. They were created just days before the transfer. Every form, every ID looked perfect, too perfect. On paper, the funds were remittance payments from a business in Sri Lanka. In reality, they were fragments of Bangladesh's stolen fortune. When the RCBC branch manager is questioned, she insists she was just following orders, but no one can tell whose orders those were. Each instruction came from somewhere higher up, yet every record seems to stop one step short of the source. Then comes the most chilling discovery. The stolen funds had been transferred from those fake accounts into Philippine casinos, laundered through private rooms and VIP gambling operations. Casino staff describe men arriving with suitcases of cash, playing a few rounds at the tables, and cashing out under different names. No paper trail, no obligation to report. Within days, the $81 million was transformed into clean, untraceable money and disappeared. But the digital footprint didn't lie. Cyber forensics teams from the US and Europe joined the probe. They discovered that the malware which infiltrated Bangladesh bank systems wasn't random. It matched code fragments seen before in other high-profile attacks. The Sony Pictures hack, the WannaCry ransomware, and several breaches targeting South Korean institutions. The fingerprints pointed to one name, the Lazarus Group, a hacking unit believed to be operating out of North Korea, working under direct state oversight. Their mission: steal foreign currency, bypass sanctions, and fund the regime. For investigators, the realization was staggering. This wasn't just a crime. It was an act of cyber warfare, executed through the world's banking arteries. Months later, the stolen money remained largely unrecovered. A few million were traced, some frozen, but most gone forever. In the end, Bangladesh got back less than 15% of what had been taken. And yet, despite the international outcry, no one was ever convicted for orchestrating the attack. The RCBC manager faced charges for negligence. A few low-level facilitators vanished. But the true architects, the people sitting behind those terminals in Pyongyang or somewhere beyond, never faced justice. In Dhaka, the Bangladesh bank quietly rebuilt its systems. New firewalls, new passwords. But in the corridors, the silence remained heavy. An entire country's reserves stolen with a few keystrokes. No alarms, no break-ins, just trust exploited. It forced the world's central banks to confront an uncomfortable truth, that the future of crime wouldn't rely on guns or masks, but on code, patience, and access. One investigator later said, "They didn't need to rob a vault. They robbed the system that holds every vault." And somewhere on a quiet night, another man sits at another computer, waiting for the right moment to press enter.